Hello, my name's Rob and welcome to Swift Slots. So this is the first in a very short series of videos about how I got my vintage Skeletrix Metro 6R4 back up and running with my own custom handmade chassis. So if you grab yourself a cup of tea, I'll take you through it. Thank you. Okay, so what I've got to do here is remove some plastic on either side of the guide support to allow the guide to rotate. So as you can see now, what we've got is we've got a nice slack fit of the guide, moving very freely, and it's very free to swing from side to side with equal amounts of movement. And also, most importantly, when you bring the guide out, you can push it in from either end of the guide with no resistance, and it's all clearing in there, and there's no side to side play in that guide worth talking about. And what I was doing with the drill, I have drills in 0.1 of a millimeter increments. Here they are. It's a 60 piece set. I think it's 60 anyway, whatever it is. They go up in 0.1 mil. So this is a 3.6 mil drill. And what I do is I go in there and I relief the hole and come up onto the shank as well and polish the inside of the hole with the shank, and keep going back and forth, polishing the shaft, the hole with the shank, moving it back and forth until, as you saw, the guide is nice and smooth. Nothing wrong with that at all. So the next step is getting the front axle all sorted out. Now these are my homemade bearings that I made on my lathe. Custom made for this job. You can buy them, I'm sure, but I just found it more fun to make them. And they're drilled out to 2.4 mil, which is a good fit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the bearings into the chassis, and I'm going to glue the bearing into place. It's already a nice fit with the axle in it there. As you can see, it's not too bad. And I shall glue this bearing into place, and then I shall broach the bearings. So let me just glue this into place and I'll show you what broaching is if you don't know what it is. So this is a pack of broaches, and what they are is a whole selection of high-speed steel rods that have been ground on 4 or 5 or 6 sides depending on the broach. This is a 4-sided one, 5-sided actually, and they're tiny down to relatively large, all different sizes, and the taper is incredibly fine. There's very little taper on it, but each corner is not what you call sharp, but it's very hard and very precise. So it is effectively a drill, it's a reamer. So the difference here that you've got, if I zero that out, go to the other end of the broach, which is only about 2.5 inches further down the shaft, you've only opened up by 11/1000th of an inch. That is it. So it's very, very, very gentle. So what you do to broach in this axle, now each bearing is pretty smooth, not too bad, but I say I didn't drill them out to the final fit, so they're almost there, but not quite. So what I'm going to do, this is the correct broach for the size, so it kind of goes in halfway, and it's not about this one, it's this one here that's the job. So it's just stopping there. So if I just take a few rotations and pop it around the other side, come back in there, just a couple of rotations. I'm just using that tip as a guide in this particular instance. It's just poking through. So if I come through here like this and just nip that through there, just so that it pokes through, I can then try the bearing, and there you go. Look at that. Absolutely spot on, with virtually no wobble anywhere, and that is 100% lined up. And there you go, that's broaching. So the next job is to get the motor pod fitted into the chassis. Although I'm going to have to relieve the screw holes here by just a fraction perhaps, but I won't do that until I've shouldered these self-tapper screws. So the trick here is to get the motor pod, wrong side, get the motor pod in here, held on with those 4 screws, so you've got a nice bit of movement in all directions, so it's not all trapped. And the way I'm going to achieve that is to use these standard screws, but because I made this chassis, I had control over tolerances. So what I've done, that screw hole there, as you see, is a little bit, well, it's far too tight actually. That needs to be backed off by quite a bit. Let's try this one. But there we go. Right, so the screw head is a little bit, it's a little bit big for this little cutout that I've made. So I'm going to go on the lathe and I'm going to take off about 10 or 15/1000th of an inch off the edge of this screw to squeeze down the size of the head. And I'm also going to introduce you to this tool here, which is a welded bracket that I've made to go in my lathe to hold my Dremel tool, which is this bit. So this grinding wheel, which is the reinforced sizes, not the small fragile ones, that actually goes into this fixture, and then I can control the grinding wheel in the lathe, so I can come in and I can very, very accurately take away the threads using the grinding wheel very, very gently. It's very precise. It's a fantastic tool, and I'm glad I've made it. So I'm going to show you that process now of machining down these heads and then the grinding wheel. Some of it will be in fast forward and some of it won't. I'll have to judge it as I go. Okay, so we'll mount this screw into the lathe, and I like to use this loop when I'm trying to take off such a small amount and want to get it accurate. So my big head might get in the way for a moment, but we'll worry about that in a minute. So, mount the screw head into the chuck, giving a little bit of clearance at the back. We don't want to go too tight. Lock off the apron, bring the cutter in, and I'm just going to zero up the head. So I'll go in and have a look. And there it is, that's touching. So I'm going to zero the cross feed to 0. Right, there we are. So now I'm going to take off about 15 thou. Well, that's actually about 9 thou, but I like to look at it as I go because I just get a feel for how it looks. 9 thou looks about right to me. So let's take it out and have a look. Right, here we are. So it's still got plenty of meat around the Phillips, whatever you call them, the jobbies, and it gives a nice clean shoulder to the head. So I'll do the other 3 of those and then I'll come back and take away the threads. So just before I finish the last one, I just want to show you this cross slide so you can see what I'm doing, so you can see my point of reference. So if I just turn you around here, for those of you who don't know anything about lathes, this is my cross slide, I believe. Cross or compound, I think it's cross slide. So on here you've got graduation marks. So when I brought the cutter up to the head, I made the cutter touch the head and I turned this dial here to 0. So what I can do now, well, now I established that 9/1000ths of an inch is roughly what I wanted. It's on here 9/1000th now. If I just finished doing the 3rd screw, all I'm doing is I'm winding this in a couple of thou at a time until I get to 9 thou, and that's it. It doesn't matter what size head I've got on these screws, as long as I always come into whatever mark I've chosen on the compound slide, on the cross slide, they're all going to be the same. 9/1000ths smaller in this case, so they're going to end up being, I'll tell you, as a matter of interest, what these heads are now. So if I zero my gauge to 1/1000th of an inch, open them up, is 142.5 thou, and these will all be the same. There we are, there we are, and then that one there, 142 thousandths. There you go. So they're all the same, just by coming up to this same mark. So let's get the last one done. Go. Easy peasy. So this is the Dremel fixture that I made, that I showed you just a minute ago, all set up, all squared up to the lathe with the grinding disc ready to go, and I've mounted one of the screws into my pin vise just to get a little bit of distance, because I want to remove the threads on the shaft just here. So what I'll do is I'll mount this in the lathe, like that. I'll bring the lathe in the cutter to there. I'm going to go down with the eyepiece. I'm going to make sure that this cutter comes up against the back of the screw head just by eye through my magnifying glass, and then I'm going to wind on this adjustment here. I'm going to go in about 80 thou, or 90 thou, which is 80 thou is 2 mil, 40 thou is 1 mil, so 80 thou is 2 mil, plus an extra 10 thou for a little bit of clearance, because my plastic is 2 mil thick, so it's 80 thou. So I want to clear out about 90 thou, because I want to clear the plastic and a little bit to spare, so that the screw gets a chance to move up and down with a little bit of movement. So I will zoom in with this camera now, and I will set it up, and I'll do the first one. So that's the blade now up against the back of the head of the screw, just touching the threads and starting to take away some material. Now what I'll do is I'll zero my dial here to 0. Now I know where it is. It doesn't have to be wildly accurate, it's not rocket science. So now it's on 0. So now when I wind this dial in 90 thou, it'll move the whole cutter forwards 90 thou and give me a 90 thousandths of an inch threadless shaft on the top of that screw. So here we go. Let's get you all lined up. There it is. So as you can see, I didn't want to take away all the threads, I just wanted to take away the tops of the threads, just so that the shaft is, well, in fact you can see there, it's actually taken away all the threads in fact, because the screw isn't quite central. And that's perfectly good enough. That's given me plenty of clear shaft now, so the threads don't become entangled on the motor pod fixing points. So I'll do the other 3 and we'll fit the motor pod in. So there you are. We've got 4 bolts, reduced in head size and shouldered. Doesn't matter that there's a little bit of thread still left on them, and that's not really the worry, but they're all basically shouldered up, ready to go. So what you'll find now is that I've done nothing to these holes yet, bar one of the work I've just done. So then I'll go into those holes. Doesn't matter they're a little bit tight to start with, because once they hit that shouldered section, there you go, they go straight in. I don't know if you can see. So there we are, all nice and loose. I think you can see that. And the head size all fits. There you go, all nice and loose. No problems at all. So what we'll do is we'll screw in this pod and we'll see what we got. So in the pod goes. We'll get these 4 in. I won't do them all the way up because that's not what we want to do. So just do them all up. And there we are, right. Now let me just feel this. Okay, though I want to slacken that one off a little bit. Tighten that one up maybe. There. Now, maybe you can see that, but there's a little bit of, let me just slacken that off a little bit more so you can see. Slacken them all off actually, I'll make it a bit obvious. There, right. Now hopefully you can see that moving. And you can see it rocking. There you go, yeah, you can see that. There you go. Now that is nice and free. There you go. Nice and free. You can actually see it in the side there. You want to get that lined up. There. There you go. You can see. Now it's moving a bit too much inside that bearing holder, inside the chassis. I know it's a slightly unconventional chassis, but I shall take a little bit more at the top here, but there won't be that much room when I set the whole thing up properly anyway. So there you are. So that's the pod all in there and relieved, ready for the axle to go through. So the next job that I will need to do, I need to put the back panel in and do an exhaust detail. So I need to put a plastic card panel across the back here so that it finishes off the back end and gives me somewhere to mount my exhaust to. So the way I like to cut plastic card in a strip is work out how big my panel needs to be. So if I zero that and come down to millimeters, I can measure that, which is 11.65 mil. So then what I like to do is I like to get a straight edge and come up against and zero it. Actually, I've just forgotten what that size was now. Let's go back again. Zero that out. Right. 11.4, that's close enough. So come up to here, zero that out, and then go to 11.4, which is right there. That'll do, 11.41. Who's arguing? So, and with that, I can now do that on each end of the rule there. So set that, so that's now the width of the rule is cancelled out, and I'm only actually measuring 11.4 as a strip. Then once you've got that, you can then cut your piece like that. Let's get a square and we'll square off. I don't think that blade was the sharpest. I think this is the fresh blade here. Oh, I'm off camera, hang on. So I come back. So there we are. So just whiz him across. Now then, I can simply zero out my vernier, come back, measure the width. There we are, it's 33.88. I can lock that off. It's not that important, this measurement. Coming across, I put my blade in the groove there, put the jaw up against the blade, come over and then stick the corner of the blade right into the corner, give a bit of a press to give me an impression, and then put my blade back into the impression, bring up the square, and then score across like that. Then we can snap the plastic card away from the cut and then into the cut, and then away and into the cut. Sometimes these close ones can be a little bit of a pain, so I like to get a pair of pliers, and you can go away from the cut and into the cut, and job done. And this should now, what it is, exactly the same size as the back of that chassis. It's completely smooth and it's completely the same height. So now I've established that, I've already squared the back of this up nice and flat. So what I want to do now is I'll square that all up nicely, feel it with your fingers. Your fingers are very good tools. So feel that, get it exactly right. So it's all nice. I'm going to chamfer these edges anyway, so it's not wildly important that it's absolutely bob on. Get that nice and smooth like that, and then get my plastic weld and a small paintbrush. Just double check before I commit to glue, and we can just run a very small amount of plastic weld into that joint there, just to hold it, and that'll hold that. And then I can come through and do a slightly better joint on the inside. Let it run all the way through. There we are, and then once that's done, then I can come across back on the outside and just make sure that I hit the whole thing. There, now that should have activated all the plastic. Give it a little bit of a squeeze to really get it going. And there you are. Fiddle around with that for a few moments, and there you are. Right, now what I'll do off camera is I'll put an elastic band around here just to put a little bit of tension on that for a couple of hours, and then I'll come back and I'll chamfer all these corners off neatly and nicely, and then we'll make some exhaust detail to go on the back, a centerpiece turned on the lathe, and then 2 exhaust pipes with some 1.6mm brass tube that I've got, and I'll show you that in a mo. Now my glue has all dried. What I'm going to lightly do now is file away the little shoulders that have been left. Nothing too heavy, just very gently keep filing away until I just touch the edge of the chassis. You can just see there I've just caught the edge and taken away the shine of the glue, and then just lightly knock the corner off. And don't go too mad, just a little bit, just lightly, and then a little buff up with some 600 grit wet and dry, just lightly, and then some very fine Scotch Brite over the top. Bring it all in nicely. There you go. Use my clothes as rags because that's what they're for, aren't they? And there you go. Bit of dust on there, but that'll do. So that's just nicely finished off. A nice little radii on there. And I'll just do the other sides and put you on fast forward again. That's all that done. All nicely curved off, falls away neatly, nice curved corners, reasonably square but not too square, just easy on the eye. So the next job is to make the exhaust. So to do that I'm going to use this piece of plastic card rod, and the diameter of this is, if I can take it to millimeters, there we are, 4.77, so it's basically just under 5 mil. And I'm going to turn that up on the lathe and just give basically 2 bands with some rounded ends, and I'm going to flat off the side with some sandpaper and stick it in the middle, and then I'm going to use this brass tube. It's 1.6, which actually scales up to be 2 inches, so that would be a 2-inch pipe, and they'll be sticking out the back either side of the silencer effectively. So to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop that back into there. I'm going to drop a wheel axle assembly through there, and then I'm going to pop that into the back of the car. And what that's doing is that's giving me my surface area to play with and what I want to make it look like. So obviously the exhaust is going to sit somewhere around there, and this is only approximate, it doesn't really matter, it's not life and death, so it's just got to look right. And the 6R4 had an exhaust pipe that shows from the back. It is a fairly decent sized feature of the car, but you know, who cares, it's a toy car, so we're just going to make it look cool. So what I want to do, if I go somewhere around that wide, just about the size of the recess in that skirt there, it's probably about what it should be in real life. That's 18.44, 18.5 mil, whatever. So we're going to mark off roughly that much to here. and I'm going to pop this in the lathe, and I'm going to turn a silencer, and I'll take you to the lathe right now. So here we are, back on the lathe. Now I'm going to freehand this a little bit, just doing it by eye, no particular measurements in mind, just going to wing it like I often do on a lot of my builds. So just watch along, and we'll work this thing out as we go. And there we are. I think, to be fair, I think it'll be fine. Maybe not. Maybe this end needs a bit more rounding. I think that's good enough. Okay, in the interests of full disclosure, I did go back and take a little bit off one end because it was 10,000ths difference. Put a little bit of a shape on both ends, tidy it up a little tiny bit, and there we are. So what I want to do now is stick it to the back of the car. So I've put the wheels and axles all back in because that will allow me to seat the car within the body and basically set everything up. The motor's flapping around, but that doesn't matter for a minute. So I just needed to get this back end section here. So that's going to sit somewhere around in there. So what I'll do is I'll file a flat onto this and we'll position it in. So I'll just get a flat going on here. Oops. Because I've got dirty fingers, I can pretty much see that flat is going nice and evenly, and if it's not, I can adjust it as I go. That looks pretty good to me, actually. Right, so there we are. So that's that. Now, if I just hold this whole thing, get it all nice and square. Turn this light off a minute. My fluorescent light, it likes to hum. So that's that. There. Right, and then pop him onto there. And we're just going to eyeball this, to be honest with you. I'm not going to go to extreme lengths to measure it. I'm just going to get it looking just so it looks about there. That's about right. So then what we do is grab some plastic cement. And the paintbrush, get a little bit on there and pop a spot on there. There, barely anything, just a tiny dot. I just make him square again, just set him all up. I think that'll do. Right, take the body away. Now it's just tacked in there over the other side there. I should be able to just put a decent dollop in there. And this gloss part won't really show because A, I'm going to buff it off anyway, and B, it's up inside the body, so it doesn't matter. So there you go. I just check it with my eyepiece to make sure it's right. Yep, that's in there. Right, so the next job is to cut some 1.6mm brass tube. I'm going to drill some 1.6mm holes either side of this exhaust, or this silencer. Cut 2 pieces of pipe, stick them on either side, so it gives the impression that we got exhaust pipes. Like I say, this isn't supposed to be a show-winning model. It's just a bit of detail on the back of the car, just a bit of fun. It's just for me, for my own personal pleasure. So we'll do that now. So what I want to do is work out how big my exhaust pipes will be. Get it happy. And then just work out how long my tailpipes want to be. 8mm. I'm going for 8mm. And then we'll get those on. So first of all, I need to drill where my pipes are going to be. So I'm going to go right there. Surprising how hard plastic card can be. Right. Bang. Right, okay, that's one done. You could have done without that, but never mind, no damage. Right, so there's my 2 holes. Check my pipe fits. It will fit, so we can just give it a little bit of a more of a ease. I'm not worried about the burr. The burr will just add to the strength. There you go. Just make sure that they're in the right place. Yep, that's central to that, and that's central to that. Just ease him down a hair. Yep, that's central. Right, that's good enough. Right, let's get you on the lathe and I'll cut this pipe down. There you are. 2 parted off micro bore brass pipe. Okay, just so this video is not about 4 hours long, I've done a little bit of cleaning up of these pipes off camera, and I've marked the end I want to bond in, which with a little bit of Sharpie. So we just pop those pipes in, like that. That's sticking out a little bit, to be honest with you. I don't really want it sticking out. I'll force it over with my drill. Just there, that'll do it. Right, so pop him in there and line him up like that. And get the other one. Pop him in. How does he look? A little bit again, so just ease him over. There we go. Find the marked end, which is that one there. Get him in. There we are. So there's my 2 exhaust pipes, tips. And I was going to do the old super glue trick. Dot of super glue. Scalpel. And then get those in exactly the right place, or exactly where I want them. Squeezing them together. Pick up the super glue. And dump it in there. There we are. Right. That looks pretty even to me. And then on the back of the car, it's going to look something like that. Now I should really be using my spray booth, but I can't be bothered, so it's out with the non-spray booth. There we are. That'll do it. Done. So let's see what we got after a little bit of a quick spray. Taking off masking tape is always so tricky. There we go. There we are. There it is. It'll sit something like that. There. I'll put up a picture now of the original 6R4 and you can compare my exhaust to the original. So that's the end of part 1. That gets the chassis finally all buttoned up, all ready to move on to fitting it into the shell and getting the interior and glass all done. So hopefully you've enjoyed this content. If you do, maybe you'd subscribe and hit the little bell. That would be awesome. Thank you very much.